Welcome to the fifth chapter of the book of Joshua. Before we go any further, I just like to mention that this might be considered an adult only chapter. Depends on how you look at certain subjects. And so without going any further, just giving you a little warning that you might want, if you have young people, and you might not want to, or might not want to go through this subject, basically circumcision. And it begins in chapter 5. And it came to pass, as all the kings, the Vasilis, a basilica, basil plant comes from that, all the kings of the Amorites, the ones who were on the other side of the Jordan by the sea. So apparently they're talking about the ones between the Jordan and the Mediterranean, and all the kings of Phoenicia by the sea. And that would be up really further right. Phoenicia's way up in here where Tyre and Sidon are, and they're down here. So, and the Amorites are over here, and the children of Israel just went across, and they'll be there at Gilgal. And when they heard that the Lord, Kyrios, Theos, caused the Jordan River to dry up, Potamon, we have the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., actually means river in Greek, so it's river. So caused it to dry up from before the sons of Israel in their passing over, that their thoughts melted away, and they were struck with terror, and there was not among them any one with intellect because of the presence of the sons of Israel. Now, they were been told to destroy these people, so I suppose they couldn't even surrender, although they did. Later, we'll find out a strange story, interesting story, on how this one group of people did surrender by saying that they were real far away, where actually they were lying and they were in the path of the Israelites. But these people here, that says that without any intellect in their thoughts, so basically they're fearful, a lot of consternation of what could possibly be happening, and so forth, concerning these people coming towards them. Now, as far as the circumcision, as we mentioned, well, I'm not teaching a class on biology. So if you want to find out about circumcision, suggest going to Wikipedia. Has a good article on circumcision, everything about it, the good things and the bad things. I would think that if God decided or told the people to do this, it wouldn't be something that was bad. But you can read that article, find out more about how it all takes place. And so about this time, the Lord said to Esau, that is Joshua, again, Jesus in the New Testament, make to yourself flint rock knives, and sitting down circumcise the sons of Israel from a second time. Now, the second time exactly is hard to say, but these flint rock knives are very, very sharp. I lived in Missouri, and we had flint rocks there, and you could pick it up. And I think they were close to a river, in the river, streams, and they're just like a razor blade. And this is what they used, real sharp flint rock knives. I guess they didn't have small knives. And they would circumcise, cut the foreskin of the away from the male genital, and it says, so this is what they're to do a second time. Now, exactly what a second time is or consists of, I'm not sure, but originally, back in Genesis 17:10, it says with Abraham, and this is the covenant which you shall observe between me and you, God and Abraham, and between your seed after you. Every male to you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised of the flesh of your foreskin, and it will be for a sign of covenant between me and you. And a male child 8 days old shall be circumcised by you, every male unto your generations. the native-born servant of your house, and the one bought with silver, the slaves, basically, from every son of an alien who is not from your seed. So even if they weren't Jewish, they were there, they were to be circumcised. By circumcision he shall be circumcised, the native-born servant of your house, and the one bought with silver. And my covenant will be upon your flesh for an eternal covenant. Now, going forward as far as today, this is with the people in the Old Testament, the Jews, and there's nothing in the New Testament that I can think of that says that we Christians are to have to be circumcised. I think it's a spiritual thing between you and your decision with your child, and it continues and shows a covenant with God. This was originally with Abraham. And the uncircumcised male who shall not be circumcised in the flesh of his foreskin in the 8th day, that soul shall be utterly destroyed from its race. From my covenant he effaced. And God said to Abraham, Sarah, your wife, her name shall not be called Sarah, but Sarah, but Sarah adds two R's in there. Sarah will be her name. And so then it ends up in it. Abraham was 99 years old when he circumcised the flesh of his foreskin. So apparently he did his own. Woo. And Ishmael, his son, was 13 years old when he circumcised the flesh of his foreskin. So adults. Now, I know I've seen pictures of tribes in Africa where the young men come of age and they're circumcised and they go through this ritual, and it's something that's beyond just the Bible. It's something that was now, whether it was originated with Abraham and spread, I don't know, but it's a possibility. Now, going back to where we are, and Joshua made to himself flint rock knives, and circumcised the sons of Israel upon the place being called Hill of Foreskins. It's pretty bizarre, but apparently there was hundreds of thousands of males, so this was being done. It says, and this is the account for which Joshua, or Esau, circumcised all the people, the ones coming forth from Egypt, the male, all men of war. Now, apparently the man of war would be anybody over a certain age, even the ones that died in the wilderness in the way of their coming forth from out of the land of Egypt. Now, doesn't mean the dead people were circumcised, but the ones that remained through that period of time of the ones that had died, that all the people coming forth were circumcised, and all the people being born in the wilderness in the way of their coming forth from out of the land of Egypt were not circumcised. Well, that's really interesting. So for 40 years it says, for 40 years Israel turned in the wilderness. Therefore, most of them were uncircumcised of the ones for combat coming forth from out of the land of Egypt, the ones resisting the commandments of the Lord God, and the ones whom the Lord separated to them, for them to not behold the land which the Lord swore by an oath to our fathers to give to us, a land flowing milk and honey. So all these people that didn't come through the wilderness, many of the ones that did come through, even though they were not circumcised, you would think that would be the first thing they do because it was such an important ritual, but the disobedience is proof here because they weren't. And their sons he firmed instead of these, the ones that came through, whom Joshua or Esau circumcised. For they were uncircumcised on account of them being born along the way of uncircumcised ones, the people that were revolting against Moses, apparently. And being circumcised, all the nation had rest at that time, sitting down in the camp until they were healed. The healing, the pain of cutting off the skin, as much as I can imagine. And then we see what happens, and earlier with Jacob and his 12 sons, and they went to this area, Shechem. These people in Shechem wanted the Jews to join with them, and Dinah was defiled by Shechem, and Hamor, the father, found out about it, and I don't think he was raped, but apparently the Jews thought he was, or the 12 brothers. And so when they found out about the treachery, it says, and they spoke to them, for they defiled Dinah, their sister. And Simeon and Levi, the brothers of Dinah, said to them, we shall not be able to do this matter, to give our sister to a man who has a foreskin, for it is scorn to us. That is, that they wanted to join together. Only in this will we be like you and dwell among you, if you should become as us, and we you, in the circumcision of every male of yours. And we will give our daughters to you, and from your daughters we will take to ourselves wives, and we will live by you, and we will be one race. But if you should not listen to us of the being circumcised, taking our daughter we shall go forth. And the words were pleasing before Hamor, the father, and Shechem, the son, who had taken Dinah. And the young man did not pass time to do this word, for he clung to the daughter of Jacob. So I believe he loved her, but it was not something that the sons of Jacob thought was right. And he was most honorable of all of the ones in the house of his father, which was Hamor. Shechem was honorable. And Hamor and Shechem his son came to the gate of their city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, so they came all the way to the people, and the two men, Hamor and Shechem, these men are peaceable with us. Let them live upon the land and trade in it. And the land, behold, it's spacious before them. We shall take to ourselves wives of their daughters, and we shall give our daughters to them. In this only we the men be like us, to dwell with us, so as to be one people, in every male of us being circumcised, as also they have been circumcised. And their cattle and their four-footed animals and their possessions, will they not be ours? Only in this should we be like them. So it goes on and on until the brothers decided to, let's see if I can find it here. It had it marked. 24, I think it's in verse 24. Yeah, right here. And they listened to Hamor and Shechem his son, all the ones going forth at the gate of the city, even were circumcised in the flesh of their foreskin, every male. And it came to pass in the third day, when they were in misery. See, that was the same thing as with the third day here with Joshua, after the all being circumcised, are all in misery. While the people were in misery, the two sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, brothers of Dinah, each taking his sword, then entered to the city safely, and killed every male. Also Hamor and Shechem his son they killed by the mouth of the sword, and took Dinah from out of the house of Shechem, and went forth. So now it continues, and the Lord said to Esau, in today's day I remove the scorn of Egypt from you. So it's a symbolic of removing the scorn by removing the foreskin, apparently. And he called the name of that place Galgala, or Gilgal in King James, unto this day. And the sons of Israel encamped in Gilgal and observed the Passover on the 14th day of the month at evening at the descent of Jericho in the plain. And they ate from the grain of the land on the next day of the Passover, unleavened breads and new corn. On this day, the manna failed, so that wafer type of a food that they ate for the 40 years failed, no longer appeared to them. On the next day after their eating, from out of the grain of the land, the situ, grain, we have a parasite, so alongside the grain, a parasite. And no longer manna existed to the sons of Israel, But they gathered fruit of the place of the Phoenicians in that year. And so we'll go back to so the Phoenicians are way up here. So they went all the way up there and got food and brought it back and started settling all in this land here. And it came to pass as Joshua was in Jericho. Now I think I'm going to put a paragraph right here. Let's see if I can find somewhere. I think this would be a paragraph because it changes to a very important story or incident, one that deserves its own heading. In 5:13 it says, "And it came to pass as Jesus," remember his name is Joshua or Jesus in the New Testament, "was in Jericho," or by it, "and in looking up with his eyes, he beheld a man standing before him. And his broadsword was unsheathed in his hand." So he had his sword out and standing in front of Joshua. And coming forward, Jesus said to him, "Are you ours or of our opponents?" Wow, this is a powerful verse. "And he said to him that, I am the commander-in-chief of the force of the Lord. Now I have come." The commander-in-chief of the force, one that had to be the other angels and the heavenly beings. He's the commander-in-chief. It mentions in when David took a census of the people, he wasn't supposed to, and God called down that he had to go through choice of one of three things to be punished, and one of them was they ended up with an angel with a plague going among the sons of Dan and killing 70,000. One angel. There's other places where one angel has come and wiped out, I think it was with Hezekiah, 100,000 of the enemies. And these beings are so powerful on earth. They have no problem. They pushed the stone away from the tomb and did other powerful things. And Jesus says when Peter was worried about Jesus trying to talk him out of, be thinking that he was going to be crucified, and Jesus says, "Or do you think that I'm not able just now to call for aid of my Father? And he will stand by me more than 12 legions of angels." 12 legions, and a legion would be 100, so what would that be, 12,000? 1,200 angels, and one angel could devastate the world. We go and look in the book of Revelation, and you can see that. And that verse was in Matthew 26:53. So what does Joshua do? Jesus fell upon his face upon the ground and did obeisance and said to him, "Despota," that's a despot, is a derivative. "My master, what do you assign to your servant?" So he did obeisance. That means he went down, bent down on the ground, put his face to the ground. Remember the last chapter was mentioning at the end, it had to worship. And worship was sevo, number 4576. And worshiping, but then the King James, he did, and he worshipped, but he didn't. He didn't play any instruments or dance or sing, but he put his head to the ground. So I just want to show you this is a difference here in two chapters right next to each other. And so he said despota. Despot is got a negative connotation anymore, but basically the master, somebody who is rules over people in some way or another. And the commander-in-chief, artistrategos, an archi is a chief, and strategy is army. So commander-in-chief of an army of the Kyriou says to Isu, to Joshua, "Untie the sandal from your feet." Wow, untie the sandal from your feet. So now it says, "For the place upon which you stand upon it is holy." and Joshua, Jesus did thus. And so Exodus, Moses at the burning bush, God said, and he said, you should not approach here. Untie the sandal from your feet, for the place in which you stand is holy ground. So that was with God. And I believe here we're seeing a theophany of God appearing in human form. Could be a Christophany of Christ. Some people believe that all the theophanies of God becoming flesh on earth, they would be Christ. And there's a good argument for that. And we'll go into that here in a second. But the theophanies of Christ that have taken place, or the theophanies of God, not Christ, the theophanies of God in the Old Testament, in Genesis 32:29, it talks about Jacob wrestling with God, because it says, then Jacob asked, he says what his name was, and God says, why do you ask my name? Which is wonderful. Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. And we find that in, I don't know where it's at. Is that in Isaiah? And then next we find Gideon, who has the angel of the Lord visits him. Doesn't mention that he's God or Kyrios, but it's in Judges 6:22. But the next incident, to me, shows that the same one that was with Gideon, the angel of the Lord, which he's called, is the same as who appeared to Manoah and his wife, who were the parents of, to be the parents of Samson. And they saw the angel, and then afterwards, when it leaves, Manoah says, to death we shall die, for we have looked at God. So the angel was called God, and this is Judges 13:22. And Gideon was at Judges 6:22. And then later, I believe the most important theophany is in Daniel 3:25, and where the three men, the Jewish young men, were thrown into the fiery furnace because they would not bow down to Nebuchadnezzar and the image. And so it says, when Nebuchadnezzar went the next day to go look in the fiery furnace, what did he say? It says, was it not 3 men we threw into the midst of the fire, being shackled? And they said to the king, truly, O king. And the king said, well, here, I see 4 men being loose and walking in the midst of the fire, and there is not corruption to them. And the vision of the 4th is likened to Son of God. Son of God. So Nebuchadnezzar saw God in the flesh. I believe that these were theophanies of God taking a human form of some sort, and I believe it could be Jesus, because in Luke 9:29 it talks about Jesus changing form. Even while he was here on earth, he changed form. So why couldn't he have done it earlier? In Luke 9:29 it says, and it came to pass in his praying, the form of his person became another, and his clothes were flashing white. And then later in John 20:11, in the garden after the resurrection, with Mary, saw him and thinking that he was a gardener. And it says, and these things having said, she turns to the rear, and she views Jesus standing, and knows not that it is Jesus. And that's verse 14. And then 17, Jesus says not to touch him, although another place 2 women did touch his feet. But it's interesting about touching him. Kind of reminds me, or equals about, the place that you're standing is holy ground. And then another place was in Luke 24:13-16, on the road to Emmaus. 2 men after the resurrection. 2 men were walking on the road, and they met up with Jesus, but they didn't know who he was, because it says, and their eyes were kept to not recognize him. So again, Jesus takes another form. And then in John 21:4, it says, "And morning already coming to pass, Jesus stood on the shore," and this was up in the Lake of Galilee after the resurrection, where the disciples are all fishing and they see Jesus on the shore. And it says, "However, the disciples knew not that it is Jesus." So they didn't recognize him either. So these places that Jesus has changed form, and God becoming flesh, Jesus says in John 14:11, he says, "Believe me that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me." Jesus and God, the Father, are the one. And God can take a form if he wants. Doesn't mean that it's a different person. It's a different form. And Jesus says he'll be sending the Holy Spirit, another form of God that manifests itself to humans on earth. So we see that, and then what did Joshua do? Jesus did thus. He got ready to do what the commander-in-chief told him to do. Great chapter, wonderful chapter. Chapter 6, our next video seminar, we're going to get to the city of Jericho. Hope you'll join us in chapter 6. Until then, God bless.